as supporters of the opposition celebrated in the streets. This is some video from Greece as hundreds of people gathered out there in the square to celebrate the Syrian government falling to rebels, ending the 50-year Assad regime. Syrian state television airing a video statement earlier this morning by a group of men saying that President Assad had been overthrown and all prisoners had been set free. I also wanted to share this with you. This is a new social media post by Fox News' Trey Yingst saying now Israel is striking Syria, likely targeting weapons and systems left behind by the Assad regime. So we did want to share that very latest with you as we continue to follow all of the developments. Earlier today, the Israel Defense Forces issuing another social media post saying, in accordance with the situational assessment following the recent events in Syria, including the entry of armed personnel into the buffer zone, the IDF has deployed forces in the buffer zone and in several other places necessary for its defense to ensure the safety of the communities of the Golan Heights and the citizens of Israel. We emphasize that the IDF is not interfering with the internal events in Syria. The IDF will continue to operate as long as necessary in order to preserve the buffer zone and defend Israel and its civilians. And earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also issuing a very brief statement regarding the collapse of the Syrian government, and I did want to play that out for you right now.
This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its suppression. But it also means we have to take action against possible threats. One of them is the collapse of the Separation of Forces Agreement from 1974 between Israel and Syria. This agreement held for 50 years. Last night it collapsed. The Syrian army abandoned its positions. We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel. This is a temporary defensive position until a suitable arrangement is found. Equally, we send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel. We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel. This is
all right, and now I do want to bring in Josh Hasten, the senior Middle Eastern correspondent for the Jewish News Syndicate, to talk more about this. Josh, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks to be back, Stephanie.
So many of us woke up this morning to this breaking news that the Syrian government has now collapsed. Last week, we were seeing a huge push by the opposition forces, and now it does appear that the government has collapsed. President Assad has fled the country to an undisclosed location. So many world leaders are now weighing in. We were just hearing from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and Israel, of course, is in the region where all of this is happening. What do you make of this latest development?
It is a truly historic day in the Middle East. And for those who have been following, I mean, things change very, very rapidly here. The rebel forces were able, in a matter of a week or so, to overtake the Assad regime. Again, the Assad regime in cahoots with Iran and Hezbollah, which Israel's been fighting a war against since Hezbollah decided to attack us on October the 8th. And as the prime minister said, Israel's not intending to get involved directly in that war. You have a lot of different factions there who are fighting it out. But that being said, for the first time since 1974, you do have an Israeli presence in Syria, in that buffer zone. You have Israelis on top of Mount Hermon in northern Israel/Syria on the border there, a strategic outlook there to make sure none of these rebels decide they're going to turn against the state of Israel. And that's the reason your reporter Trey Yingst earlier said that Israel is targeting weapon systems there. These are Iranian missiles imported into Syria. Also, Israel in the last several days potentially taking out chemical weapons in Syria. We cannot let these rebels turn their attention to Israel. We cannot let them acquire any of these chemical weapons. You know, they say the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is not always the case. And it's probably not the case here. But we do hope that the rebels take their time and maintain their control over Syria. You have bad and you have worse. So at this point, it's hard to say what it is, which side is which. But again, Assad in the orbit of Syria, attacking Israel for many, many years through their proxies, through Hezbollah in Lebanon, and now the Assad regime is gone.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that, and I'm posting the social media message by Trey Yingst saying that Israel is striking Syria, likely targeting weapons and systems left behind by the Assad regime. And you were speaking about this because right now it is a little unclear as to exactly what is going to happen now. There is a vacuum currently, so to speak, in Syria. How does that impact Israel? I have to imagine greatly.
Yeah, it could, again, if the rebels start targeting Israel. I mean, it could impact us greatly. But as the prime minister said, very significantly, it's a direct result of Israel's response to Hezbollah, which caused the rebels to have hope, to gain strength in order to advance on Syria. And now that's exactly where we are right now. But we're hoping that it's going to take a long time for them to get their act together. Ideally, pundits who were saying that they wanted the Syrian regime to be weakened extremely, but not taken over. That's not the case. We're seeing the images. We're seeing the celebrations on the streets of Syria. We're seeing the statues of the Assads being pulled down. Very reminiscent, I think, of the situation in Baghdad years ago when Saddam Hussein was taken out of power. But Israel's paying very close attention. We sent reinforcements up to the Golan, and now moving into Syria over the weekend. Our intelligence capabilities are great. And again, as the prime minister said, it is directly as a result of us attacking Iran, and weakening Hezbollah that we're in the situation now. Now it's a game of waiting and seeing what happens. I highly suggest to those rebels not to turn on Israel, because if you want to end up like Hezbollah and the others, the Houthis and all the others Israel's attacked, the biggest mistake they could make is try to start up with the strong state of Israel. It's amazing after October 7th, we are still this strong. We are a source of stability in the Middle East, despite everything going on around us.
And let's talk about that. You were mentioning the connection with Syria and Hezbollah, Syria and Iran. All of these are interconnected. When we take a look at the larger picture, especially as you mentioned, it's been more than a year since Israel began its conflict with Hamas specifically, still standing strong. How does it impact the larger picture? Does the momentum continue to shift more in the favor of Israel now that we see the toppling of the Syrian government?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. You see that Hamas has been weakened tremendously down in Gaza. And now they've lost another one of their backers, Syria. Iran has been weakened. Hezbollah is not in the picture right now. Yes, they've already violated the ceasefire several times. By the way, Hamas just recently, over the last couple hours, firing rockets at humanitarian convoys, try to bring aid into Gaza, firing at Israeli positions. But Hamas is, I think, desperate. I think you're more likely to see a push towards some sort of agreement with Hamas. I think they're more willing now that they're isolated, now that they're alone, now that Iran has been weakened. You got to remember, these are all the proxies of the octopus, which is Iran. Israel has been fighting a war on 7 fronts. And now if Syria decides they're going to get involved in these rebels, that would be an 8th front opening. I highly recommend they don't do so.
And I wanted to ask you that because it does seem like Hamas is now more open to a ceasefire negotiations. What is the latest on that?
So we have reports over the weekend that the Qatari is now once again involved in trying to mediate some sort of ceasefire deal. Remember, we have 100 men, women, a child, and a baby who are still being held in the dungeons in the hell, which is the tunnels of Hamas. They're still being held there. But now it seems that the weakening of all these players, all their supporters, their financial backers, Iran, the inability for them to receive more additional weapons or whatnot, it seems like they're willing to come to the table. So Israel all along has been willing to strike some sort of deal with Hamas. Hamas has said no time and time again. And it seems now there is some tangible progress, because this is the Middle East where strength wins out. Hamas realizes after all this time, Israel is the strong partner. We are the stable ones. Hezbollah is out of the picture. So now Hamas, it seems, would be more interested in cutting some kind of deal. What that deal will look like still remains to be seen. Obviously, Israel does not want to have to release all those hardened terrorists who are in Israeli prisons for murdering Israelis and other civilians from around the world. We don't want it to get to that. But Hamas is reeling, Hezbollah is reeling, the rebels. That is where the focus is this week, and especially today. But this is the Middle East, where things are changing very, very quickly.
And speaking of that, Josh, I wanted to bring in the very latest from Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst. He just posted this moments ago, saying that former Syrian President al-Assad and his family are now in Russia. That is according to state media. I also wanted to bring up another social media post by President-elect Trump, also talking about this and referring to Israel, saying Assad is gone. He has fled his country. His protector, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, was not interested in protecting him any longer. He then goes on to say Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now, one because of Ukraine and a bad economy, the other because of Israel and its fighting success. And so I wanted to talk with you about that. All of these are interrelated, it seems. And so we know, according to Trey Yingst, that Assad has now fled to Russia. President-elect Trump talking about the downfall and pushing Russia to be, on what he says is the right side of the world right here. What do you make of all of this? Because it's not just, and we've talked about this, what's happening in the Middle East is not just only happening to the countries there. This is international ripple effects.
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw a report that, in fact, Russia did give Assad and his family immunity. There were rumors whether he went to the United Arab Emirates, whether there was a rumor today that he is dead, that his plane crashed. It looks like at this point that he is in Russia. Russia has been a backer of the Assad regime for years. Russia has always wanted a stronghold in the Middle East. They saw a weak government in the United States, and they decided to step in. This was years ago, and they've been financing the Assad regime all these years so that Russia could have access to the Middle East. They could have troops in the Middle East. If I'm not mistaken, they had a port and bases throughout Syria. And now Russia is in a position where they are forced to step back. Their main player, they've been supporting Assad all this time. So their puppet in the Middle East is now gone. So Russia is forced to reassess their situation. It's forced to take a step back, along with Iran. Russia has always been in cahoots with Iran over the last decade plus. They're going to have to reassess their situation. They're fighting this war in the Ukraine now for several years. Perhaps they're going to focus more on that war and less on what's going on in the Middle East now that they've lost their foothold. This is the perfect opportunity for the Trump administration to step in, reinstitute the policies that they had in their first term, namely to put sanctions on the Iranian regime. Iran still remains the biggest threat. They are the ones trying to pursue nuclear weapons. So hopefully the Trump administration will immediately put pressure on Iran, regardless of what happens in Syria. Certainly, the Iranians have been weakened, but they're still there. They're still aiming for nuclear weapons, which, yes, affects not only Israel, but it affects the entire world.
And I also wanted to ask you this. We were talking about President-elect Trump. Right now, President Biden is still in office. We are anticipating him to deliver some live remarks any moment now about the Syrian government collapse. President Biden still the acting president. There is almost a limbo period as we're waiting January 20th for President-elect Trump to assume presidency. But, in regards to Israel and the stability in the Middle East, what would you like to hear from President Biden today?
I'm sorry, you cut out there. I think you asked about President Biden. I mean, look, the situation that we're in now in terms of Syria started under the policies of President Barack Obama. If you remember the Arab Spring and the Syrian civil war back in 2011, this is when the United States decided that they were going to appease these dictators in the Middle East, specifically Assad, the regime in Tehran. So again, it's been disappointing in terms of the policies of the current administration, of the Biden administration, whether it's in Syria, whether it's Iran, showing weakness, trying to appease all of these regimes. As this has been going on, you see Hezbollah continuing to build their arsenal before, I'm talking about before the war, until Israel struck them. You see Iran striving for nuclear weapons. You see Russia deciding that they're going to have a foothold in the Middle East and supporting Syria. It all stems from a mentality of strength versus weakness. You show strength in the Middle East, you may not garner friends and establish friendships, but you certainly will get the respect of all of these bad actors in the Middle East. And that was what President Trump succeeded to do. And we expect that to happen very, very shortly after he takes over on January the 20th.
Of course, we're continuing to follow this breaking news. So many developments happening moment to moment. Josh, what else are you keeping a very close eye on when it comes to what is happening?
So we're keeping a close eye on many fronts. Obviously, Syria, Hezbollah, according to JNS, we reported the other day that Hezbollah has already decided to rearm. They've started rearming themselves. So again, you have a ceasefire here. Hezbollah is supposed to stay unarmed. UNIFIL is supposed to enforce that. So we have to still keep an eye on Hezbollah, even though they're weakened, even though Israel took out the top leadership and the commander leadership in the beeper and walkie-talkie attack. We have to keep a close eye on Hezbollah, and Hamas continues to pop their head up time and time again in different parts of Gaza. Unfortunately, an Israeli soldier was killed over the weekend or died over the weekend from wounds he sustained in Gaza. So we are still fighting that war in Gaza. The hostages must be returned to us. The 100 men, women, children, and a baby who are still being held in the dungeons of Hamas, they have to be returned to us. I think now is the time, with all these developments, now is the time for Israel to flex its muscles on all fronts and ensure the safety of our civilians. We still have 60 to 70,000 civilians who are not in their homes in the northern border. The South Lebanese residents were able to go home. The Israelis on the northern border with Lebanon were still not able to go home. So we're waiting for the day that happens.
All right, Josh, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.